The grease was already popping when she reached for a coffee can that had not moved from that spot on the stove in 15 years. No label, no lid that matched, just generations of knowing what to do with what you had. Here are 30 oddly useful African-American home hacks that actually work. Every black kitchen had one, and you knew better than to throw it away. That old coffee can sitting on the back of the stove, crusted around the rim, heavy with weeks of collected bacon grease, was the most important tool in the house that nobody ever bought. Your grandmother poured drippings into it after every breakfast, every skillet of pork chops, every batch of fried fish on a Friday night. That grease went right back into the next meal, seasoning cast iron, frying cornbread, flavoring a pot of greens that simmered all afternoon. During the 1940s and 50s, when lard cost money and butter was rationed, that can was a savings account you could taste. Some women kept two, one for pork, one for everything else, and the system was so precise that if you moved the can even an inch, she noticed, you pour olive oil now, it does the job, but it does not carry the flavor of 40 years of Sunday mornings layered into a single spoonful. The moment you coughed twice in her house, the jar came out. Not for your chest, that came later. She went straight for your feet. A thick coat of Vicks VapoRub smeared across the soles, rubbed between the toes, and then a pair of her thickest wool socks pulled up tight while she told you to get under those covers and stay there. By morning, the cough had broken. The camphor, eucalyptus oil, and menthol and Vicks act as topical cough suppressants according to the National Institutes of Health, and the feet application was widespread in African American households across the rural South through the 1950s and 60s. But the real cure was never just the Vicks. It was the weight of her hand pressing it into your skin, the smell of menthol mixing with whatever she had simmering on the stove, and her voice saying you would feel better by morning. She is gone now. The jar sits in a cabinet that nobody opens the same way. She did not reach for ice. She reached for a brown paper bag, tore it into strips, soaked them in apple cider vinegar, and pressed them flat against whatever was burned, bruised, or running too hot. A child's forehead, a grease splatter on a forearm, a sunburn from playing outside without permission. The vinegar-soaked paper cooled the skin on contact, a poultice technique tracing back centuries through both African and European folk medicine. In the 1930s and 40s, before first aid kits were common in black households, a bag from the grocer and a bottle of vinegar were the emergency room. The acetic acid reduced swelling, while evaporation pulled fever down. Your grandmother trusted this more than aspirin, and when you flinched, she held you still and said, "Hush," because she had been doing this since before you were born. Sunday morning meant pressed clothes, and pressed clothes meant cornstarch. 2 tablespoons stirred into cold water in a spray bottle that once held something else entirely. That was the formula. She would miss the collar of a white shirt, lay the iron down flat, and the steam that rose carried a faint sweetness that no commercial starch could match. Through the 1950s and 60s, when a man's shirt had to be sharp for church and a woman's dress had to hold its crease through 3 hours of preaching, cornstarch was the difference between looking put together and looking like you slept in your clothes. Too much and the fabric cracked when you moved. Too little and the crease fell before the sermon started. The starch also acted as a barrier between dirt and fabric, meaning clothes stayed cleaner longer and could be worn twice before washing, which mattered when wash day meant hauling water. A box of cornstarch cost pennies. Looking like you had money cost nothing at all. If the clothes had to be crisp, the windows had to be clear, and she cleaned them with nothing but yesterday's newspaper and a spray bottle of vinegar water. You balled the paper tight, sprayed the glass until it dripped, and wiped in circles until the streaks disappeared. The black ink acted as a mild abrasive that lifted grime without scratching, and the vinegar cut through grease that soap only smeared around. During the 1940s, when commercial glass cleaners were expensive and marketed almost exclusively to white households, this was the standard in black homes across the South and in the migration cities up north. You learned it by watching. Nobody explained the science. You just saw her windows were always spotless, and eventually she handed you a section of the paper and told you to start on the back door. Before the doctor, before the pharmacy, before anything else was even considered, you gargled warm salt water. A tablespoon dissolved in a cup so hot it nearly burned your lips, tilted back, gargled until your eyes watered, then spit and do it again. A study of older African American adults in rural North Carolina found warm salt water gargling was among the most frequently reported remedies used for sore throats, mouth sores, and toothaches when a dentist was miles away. Some added a splash of peroxide for extra sting. The salt drew infection to the surface, reduced swelling, and created a hostile environment for bacteria, all for a pinch from the box on the counter. Your mother did not ask if it hurt. She knew it hurt. And when you complained, she told you about gargling by candlelight in a house with no running water, and suddenly your sore throat did not seem so bad. That orange box of Arm & Hammer did more work than any other product in the house. She dipped a wet finger into it and brushed her teeth before toothpaste became the standard. She sprinkled it into the bathtub and scrubbed until the porcelain gleamed without a scratch. She mixed it with water into a paste that pulled the sting out of bee stings and the itch out of mosquito bites on summer evenings. Researchers at the University of Michigan confirmed baking soda was used by more than half of older African American adults for ailments from heartburn to skin irritation, often in combinations passed through 3 or 4 generations. A pinch in a glass of water settled an upset stomach in minutes. A dusting inside shoes killed odor overnight. A small dish left open in the refrigerator absorbed whatever smell the leftover fish had left behind. 1 box, 50 cents, 100 uses, and she knew every single one because her mother had known them too. She would fill the basin after supper, not the good basin, the one with the chip on the rim that lived under the bathroom sink. Hot water, 3 scoops of Epsom salts, and her feet disappeared into it with a sigh that carried the weight of a 12-hour day. In a study of older adults in the rural South, 3/4 of African American men and women reported using Epsom salts regularly, naming more uses than their white counterparts did. A cup in the bath water pulled soreness from legs that had stood all day cooking and cleaning. A warm compress soaked in Epsom water soothed a swollen knee. Some gargled with it for fever blisters when nothing else was available. The magnesium sulfate drew inflammation through the skin, and whether or not she knew the chemistry, she knew the relief. After 30 minutes, she dried her feet slowly, rubbed them with Vaseline, pulled on cotton socks, and did not stand again until morning. That basin was her only luxury. The smell hit you before you saw the pot. Sharp, alkaline, and dangerous. That was lye soap being made in the backyard, and every child knew to stay away from the kettle. She rendered fat from the last hog killing, strained it through cloth until it ran clear, and mixed it with lye water filtered through hardwood ashes. The mixture boiled for hours in a cast iron pot, stirred with a wooden paddle used for nothing else, until it thickened into a brownish paste that set overnight into bars. That same soap washed the clothes on Monday, scrubbed the floors on Tuesday, bathed the kids on Saturday, and treated poison ivy any day it showed up. Before the 1950s, Lye soap was the only soap many black families in the rural South ever knew. The women who made it tested the lye strength by dropping in a chicken feather. If it dissolved, the mixture was right. That knowledge did not come from a book. She kept a jar of pennies on the windowsill and mothballs in the corners of every closet. And if you asked why, she just said it kept things out. The pennies, specifically the older copper ones, minted before 1982, sat in jars of water near doorways because the copper oxidized and repelled wasps and flies that hated the metallic taste in the air. The mothballs, made of naphthalene, kept moths out of wool coats and Sunday suits that came out of the closet only a few times a year. In Southern black households through the 1940s and 50s, where screens had holes and air conditioning did not exist, keeping bugs out was a daily war fought with whatever was on hand. Cedar chips in the dresser drawers, bay leaves behind the baseboards, peppermint oil on a cotton ball near the back door. She had a system for every room, and the house stayed cleaner than homes with twice the money. But if pennies and mothballs were the quiet defense, castor oil was the heavy artillery, and every child ran when the bottle came out, thick, slick, and tasting like something that should never touch of a human tongue. It was forced down throats for colds, constipation, sluggishness, and anything else that could not be diagnosed by looking at you. One elderly woman in a rural North Carolina study said it plainly: castor oil is good for a whole lot of stuff. It was rubbed into scalps for dry hair, massaged into joints for stiffness, and swallowed every spring as a seasonal purge to clean out whatever winter had left behind. The ricinoleic acid in castor oil is now recognized as an anti-inflammatory compound, which means she was practicing medicine she could not name with a remedy inherited from women who brought the knowledge across the Atlantic. She stood over you with that spoon and you swallowed because refusing was never an option. Nobody makes you take it anymore, and somehow everything takes longer to heal. This one made castor oil taste like candy. A spoonful of sugar with 2 or 3 drops of turpentine, stirred once, swallowed before you had time to think about what was going in your mouth. Across the rural South, turpentine was one of the most commonly used folk remedies through the 1940s and 50s, applied externally as a chest rub mixed with lard and taken internally on sugar to break up congestion. The pine-derived oil was an active ingredient in the original formulation of Vicks VapoRub, which meant your grandmother was giving you a concentrated dose of what the pharmacy sold in a jar. According to the Texas State Historical Association, turpentine was a cornerstone of black folk medicine for everything from sore throats to snake bites. She mixed it with lard and spread it on flannel that she pinned inside your pajama top at bedtime, and you slept with the burn of pine in your chest and the weight of her hand tucking the blanket tighter. You survived every winter. She made sure of that. A bottle of rubbing alcohol lived in every bathroom and half the kitchens in black households from the 1930s through the 70s, and it answered to almost every complaint: bug bite, itching, dab it on, small cut from a kitchen knife, pour it over, muscle ache after a long day, rub it in until the skin went cold. Researchers found that African American men and women reported using rubbing alcohol for a wider range of ailments than their white counterparts, applying it to rashes, cracked skin, swollen joints, and even gums that ached from a tooth going bad. The isopropyl compound killed bacteria on contact, and the evaporation created a cooling effect that tricked the nerves into forgetting the pain for a while. She kept the bottle within arm's reach at all times, and when she dabbed it on a scrape and you pulled away from the sting, she held your arm tighter and said, "The burn means it is working." If you grew up in a black household in the rural South before the 1960s, You might have worn a small cloth pouch around your neck that smelled like the devil himself had cooked something in it. That was Asafoetida, a dried resin from the ferula plant, ground into powder that stank so strongly of sulfur and garlic that people kept their distance, which, according to the grandmothers who tied those bags around children's necks, was exactly the point. The smell kept sick people away from you, which accomplished the same thing as keeping sickness away. Documented across both African American and Appalachian folk traditions, the Asafoetida bag was a walk-in quarantine that cost less than a nickel. Kids wore them to school and nobody sat next to them, which meant nobody coughed on them either. When flu season came through and every other child was home in bed, the one wearing the bag was still standing. She never said, "I told you so." She just tied a fresh one. And if the Asafoetida bag did not keep the sickness away, the onion in the sock was waiting at home. You would come in from school burning up, and before you could even sit down, she had sliced a raw white onion in half, pressed the flat side against the sole of each foot, pulled your socks up over them, and sent you to bed. By morning, the fever had broken and the onion had turned dark, almost black, which she held up as proof that it had drawn the sickness right out through the skin. Folk medicine practitioners across African American communities believed the feet were a gateway to the body's healing pathways, a concept that echoes the Chinese practice of reflexology, which maps organ systems to specific points on the soles. Whether it was the sulfur compounds in the onion acting as a natural anti-inflammatory or the placebo of your grandmother's absolute confidence, the fever broke every single time. You cannot explain it to a doctor and you cannot argue with the results. Dryer sheets cost money. Aluminum foil was already in the drawer. She would tear off a square, crumple it into a ball the size of a baseball, and toss it in the dryer with the wet clothes. When the cycle finished, nothing stuck together and nothing crackled when you pulled it apart. The foil discharged the static electricity between tumbling fabrics, acting as a conductor that neutralized the charge before it could bond synthetic fibers to cotton. Through the 1960s and 70s, when Black households were stretching every dollar across groceries, rent, and utilities, a reusable ball of foil that lasted months was a small victory. She used the same 3 foil balls all winter. The kids thought it was strange until they moved out and realized they were paying for something their mother had solved for free with a piece of Reynolds wrap. Nobody talks about this one, but the women who knew it swore by it. A handful of dry cornmeal scattered across a wooden or linoleum floor, left to sit for 10 or 15 minutes, then swept up with a stiff broom, and it took every speck of grease, dirt, and grime with it. The coarse grains absorbed oil on contact, acted as a mild abrasive against stuck-on residue, and left the floor cleaner than mopping alone ever could. In Black kitchens through the 1940s and 50s, where cast iron skillets popped the grease onto the floor daily and commercial floor cleaners were either unavailable or unaffordable, cornmeal was the solution. It was already in the pantry. The same bag used for cornbread and hoe cakes did double duty on the kitchen floor. Some women added a pinch of salt to the cornmeal for extra scrubbing power. The trick was in the timing. Leave it too short and it just sat there. Leave it too long and it turned to paste. She timed it by instinct, the way she timed everything else. You sat down and the plastic stuck to the back of your thighs in the summer and shocked you cold in the winter, and you did not dare complain because that couch cost more than a month's rent and it was going to look brand new for the next 20 years. Plastic furniture covers were the armor of Black living rooms from the 1960s through the 80s, fitted over sofas and armchairs purchased on layaway after months of saving. The covers protected fabric from children, from company, from Sunday dinner spills, and from the slow wear of daily life. Removing them meant someone important was coming, a pastor, a suitor, or a family from out of town. The rest of the time, you sat on the plastic and you liked it. There was an argument in every household about when the covers could finally come off. The answer was never. She won that argument because nobody loved that couch more than the woman who paid for it. The first time you saw her do it, you thought she had lost her mind. A cut on your hand that would not stop bleeding, and she reached into the corner of the porch ceiling, pulled down a wad of cobweb, and pressed it directly into the wound. The bleeding stopped almost instantly. Spider silk contains natural proteins that promote clotting, and the web's fine mesh acts as a scaffold for blood cells to bind to, something modern researchers confirmed when developing synthetic wound closure materials. In Black communities across the rural South, cobwebs were a first response bandage when gauze was not in the house and the nearest doctor was an hour's drive away. Some packed the web with chimney soot for extra clotting power. It looked like witchcraft. It worked like medicine. And she had learned it from a woman who had never seen the inside of a hospital, but knew how to stop blood with whatever the house provided. When the cough settled deep in the chest and would not come up, she went to the kitchen and started warming tallow in a small pan. Beef tallow or mutton fat rendered down until it was liquid, spread thick across a square of flannel cloth and pressed against your chest while it was still hot enough to make you gasp. According to the Texas State Historical Association, tallow on a flannel cloth warmed and placed on the chest was a documented African American folk practice for relieving congestion, used widely through the 1940s and 50s. The heat opened the bronchial passages, the fat sealed in warmth for hours, and the flannel held everything in place while you slept. Some added drops of turpentine or camphor to the tallow for extra vapor. She would pin the cloth inside your undershirt so it would not shift during the night, tuck the blankets around you so tight you could barely move, and check on you every hour until the rattling in your chest went quiet. Those hands knew when you were healing before you did. Nothing left that house in the trash if it could serve another purpose. Bread bags became sandwich bags. Butter tubs stored leftover greens. Cool Whip containers held everything from buttons to bacon grease to screws that came from something nobody remembered taking apart. Coffee cans held cooking fat, loose change, and nails. Glass jars from pickles and jelly lined the pantry shelves filled with dried beans, rice, and flour. During the Depression and through the lean decades that followed, Black families who survived on almost nothing developed a relationship with waste that bordered on spiritual. Throwing away a container that still had a use was as unthinkable as throwing away food. Pantyhose with runs became cleaning rags. Old sheets became curtains. A worn-out towel turned into washcloths cut by hand. She kept a drawer full of rubber bands, twist ties, and plastic bags folded into triangles. And if you threw away a perfectly good margarine tub, she fished it out before you reached the front door. The men called it medicine. The women called it what it was, whiskey. But they made it anyway because it worked. A hot toddy in a Black household meant a coffee mug of warm water or tea, a shot of whatever brown liquor was in the cabinet, a squeeze of fresh lemon, and a heavy spoonful of honey stirred until the whole thing turned golden. You drank it as hot as you could stand, climbed into bed, and sweated through the night until the cold broke by morning. The honey coated an irritated throat, the lemon provided vitamin C, and the whiskey made you stop caring about the cough long enough to sleep. Kids got a version with more honey, Though some grandmothers did not bother adjusting the ratio at all, every woman in the family claimed her recipe was the right one, and each version went with them when they died. She kept a small bottle of white vinegar on the counter next to the salt, and every morning she poured a teaspoon into half a glass of water and drank it down before breakfast. If you asked her why, she said it kept her pressure right. Over half of older African Americans in a rural North Carolina study reported using vinegar specifically for high blood pressure, often just a teaspoonful swallowed with water after a salty meal. One man in the study explained that they always told him vinegar would reduce the blood pressure because salt runs it up and vinegar brings it back down. The acetic acid in vinegar has since been studied for its potential effects on blood sugar regulation and vascular health, but she did not need a study. She needed to keep standing, keep cooking, keep showing up for a family that depended on her being alive. And if a teaspoon of vinegar every morning helped her do that, then the science could catch up when it was ready. It sounds like something from another century, because it is. When a deep cut opened up and the blood came fast, she scraped soot from the inside of the wood stove and packed it directly into the wound. According to the Texas State Historical Association, stopping blood with soot from the stove was a documented practice in African American folk medicine across the rural South, used when the nearest doctor was too far to reach in time. The carbon in wood soot is highly absorbent and creates a physical barrier that helps blood clot faster, the same principle behind modern activated charcoal wound treatments in emergency medicine. She pressed the black powder into the cut, wrapped it with a strip of clean cloth torn from whatever was closest, and tied it tight. The wound healed dark, sometimes with a faint gray line that never fully went away. Those scars told a story about a time when the kitchen was the hospital and the woman in it was every doctor you were going to get. And those same hands that packed soot into wounds on Tuesday were shaving lye soap into the wash pot on Monday morning before the sun came up. A large cast iron pot set over a fire in the yard, filled with water hauled from the well, and a bar of homemade soap whittled down with a paring knife until enough curls floated on the surface to make suds. The clothes went in by category: whites first, then colors, then work clothes last when the water was nearly gray. She stirred with a battling stick, a long wooden paddle smoothed by years of use, lifting and pressing until the dirt released. Wash day was Monday in nearly every black household in the rural South through the 1940s, and it lasted from dawn until the last piece was hung to dry. The women who did this work are mostly gone. The wash pots rusted, and Monday became just another day. That blue-capped jar of Vaseline was in every room: bathroom counter, kitchen windowsill, nightstand drawer, purse. She rubbed it on dry elbows, cracked heels, chapped lips, ashy knees, and the foreheads of children before they walked out the door looking dusty. A study of older adults found Vaseline was used by more than half of African American elders, making it one of the most common non-food home remedies in black households. It sealed moisture into skin, protected minor cuts from infection, and served as a barrier cream for babies before diaper rash had a name: a burn from the stove, Vaseline; a scraped knee, Vaseline and a Band-Aid; eyebrows that needed taming before church, Vaseline on the fingertip, smoothed across. During the 1950s and 60s, when dermatology clinics did not serve black neighborhoods and most skincare products were formulated for lighter complexions, petroleum jelly was the one product that worked on dark skin without leaving a white cast. The jar cost less than $1 and lasted months. When she died, they found 3 jars in the house, one nearly empty, worn smooth from her thumbprint. Nobody talks about this one in polite company, but kerosene was medicine in black households across the South for the better part of a century. A rag soaked in kerosene and wrapped around a sore knee, a few drops rubbed into the scalp to kill lice, a cloth dampened with it and pressed against the chest for a deep cold that would not break. According to researchers documenting folk remedies in rural North Carolina, older African Americans recalled using kerosene for ailments ranging from snake bites to joint pain, often mixed with lard or turpentine to reduce the burn on skin. The petroleum distillate acted as a solvent that penetrated deep into tissue, carrying whatever it was mixed with straight to the source of the pain. It smelled like a gas station and burned if you left it on too long, but she applied it with the steady hand of someone who had been taught by someone who had been taught by someone who had no other choice. Modern medicine would call it dangerous. She called it Tuesday. Every spring, she went out to the edge of the yard where the sassafras tree grew and dug up a section of root the length of her forearm. She scrubbed it clean, shaved the bark into a pot of boiling water, and let it steep until the kitchen smelled like root beer and the liquid turned a deep reddish brown. Sassafras tea was a spring tonic in black households across the South from the 1920s through the 60s, believed to purify the blood after a long winter of heavy eating. The Choctaw and Chickasaw nations had used sassafras medicinally for centuries before African Americans adopted the practice, creating a tradition that crossed cultures through shared land and shared need. She sweetened it with sugar and served it warm, and it tasted the way the earth smells after rain. The tree is still in the yard. Nobody digs the root anymore, and the woman who could have told them what it was for is buried less than a mile away. You heard it before you felt it. The faint sizzle of metal meeting greased hair, the pop of heat pulling through a section that had not been pressed in a week. The hot comb sat on the back burner of the stove, heated until she tested it on a piece of brown paper bag to make sure it would not scorch. Then the Blue Magic hair grease, that blue jar with the gold lid, smoothed through each section before the comb followed, pulling tight from root to tip until your hair fell straight and shining. If you moved your head, you got burned. If you cried, she told you to hold still because beauty cost something. This was the Sunday morning ritual in black households from the 1940s through the 80s, before relaxers replaced the comb and flat irons replaced the stove. Most salons charged prices that working families could not afford every week, so she did it herself with a jar of grease and a comb she had owned since before you were born. The smell of blue magic and hot metal lives in the skin, not just the mind. She is gone. The comb is in a drawer somewhere, cold and black, with years of grease nobody will ever heat again. There was no medicine cabinet in most of those houses. There was a shelf, sometimes above the stove, sometimes beside the refrigerator, sometimes in the pantry behind the flour, but always in the kitchen, because the kitchen was where everything happened, and the woman who ran it needed every remedy within arm's reach. On that shelf sat the Vicks, the Castor oil, the Epsom salts, the rubbing alcohol, the Vaseline, and whatever else she had collected from her mother and her mother before that. No prescriptions, no pharmacy bags, just a row of bottles and jars that had kept her family alive through decades when a doctor was too expensive, too far away, or would not come to a black home after dark. That shelf was a medical school built on watching and remembering, tested by generations of women who could not afford to be wrong. The shelf is bare now. The kitchen is quiet, and all the medicine in the world cannot replace what she carried in her hands. Putting a penny in the pot to keep greens green seemed like pure superstition to anyone outside African American kitchens, yet the technique actually worked through basic chemistry. Older copper pennies dropped into simmering greens released trace copper ions into cooking liquid. These ions interacted with chlorophyll molecules, stabilizing their structure and preventing color from turning dull olive during long cooking. Grandmothers noticed greens stayed vibrant and appetizing even after hours of simmering with ham hocks. Modern food science confirms copper does preserve chlorophyll, which is why commercial processors use copper compounds as color stabilizers. This hack proved that observation and experimentation in home kitchens could discover truths laboratory science would later validate. Using lard instead of vegetable oil was standard in African American kitchens until industrial marketing convinced generations that processed oils were healthier. Pure rendered pork fat created fried foods with unmatched flavor and impossibly crisp textures vegetable oils cannot replicate. Lard has a higher smoke point than many vegetable oils, remaining stable at frying temperatures without breaking down into harmful compounds. Scientists revisited the demonization of animal fats, finding lard contains less saturated fat than butter and no artificial trans fats. African American grandmothers rendered their own lard from pork fat, ensuring purity commercial products cannot match. What was dismissed as backward cooking has been vindicated by nutritional science, proving traditional wisdom was ahead of its time. Cooking rice with a clean dish towel under the lid was a technique African American cooks used to achieve perfectly fluffy grains every single time. After bringing rice to a boil and reducing to simmer, grandmothers draped a thin cotton towel over the pot before replacing the lid. The towel absorbed excess moisture that would otherwise drip back onto rice, creating soggy, clumpy results. This simple barrier allowed steam to work while wicking away condensation that ruined texture. Food scientists studying rice preparation now recommend this exact method, explaining that the towel prevents water from pooling while maintaining humid environment needed for even cooking. What seemed like grandmother's quirky habit was actually precise moisture control that professional chefs now teach. Preheating low and slow was essential wisdom that separated experienced cooks from beginners in black kitchens of the 1950s. Grandmothers never rushed their cast iron, understanding that heavy pans needed time to heat evenly across their entire surface. A skillet placed over high flame developed hot spots that burned food in patches. Instead, the pan went over low heat for 15 minutes, the iron gradually absorbing warmth until every inch reached the same temperature. Only then would the flame increase. Children learned patience watching this process. The evenly heated surface meant chicken browned uniformly, cornbread developed consistent crust, and nothing stuck. This technique protected the seasoning too, preventing thermal shock that could damage the finish. The slow approach extended the pan's life across generations. Soaking fish in buttermilk before frying was essential preparation in African American kitchens, especially when dealing with catfish pulled fresh from rivers and ponds. Fish rested in buttermilk anywhere from 30 minutes to overnight, depending on how strong the flavor needed taming. Buttermilk's acidity broke down surface proteins, tenderizing flesh, while its cultures neutralized muddy or fishy taste freshwater fish sometimes carried. The milk proteins also helped cornmeal coating adhere better, creating crispier crust that stayed put during frying. Modern food science confirms acidic marinades denature surface proteins for better texture and breading adhesion. This hack transformed humble catches into celebrated dishes that became centerpieces of fish fries and family gatherings. Frying in cast iron instead of non-stick pans was the only option in traditional African American kitchens, and science confirms this was superior choice. Cast iron retains heat exceptionally well, maintaining consistent oil temperature even when cold food is added, preventing greasy results from temperature drops. Heavy pans distribute heat evenly, eliminating hot spots that burn some pieces while undercooking others. Scientists documented that properly seasoned cast iron develops natural non-stick surface rivaling synthetic coatings without chemical concerns. The iron leaches small amounts of dietary iron into food, providing nutritional benefits modern cookware cannot offer. These pans pass through generations, gaining better seasoning with each use. What seemed stubborn tradition was wisdom about heat management. Saving bacon, grease in a coffee can by the stove was a ritual in African American kitchens that outsiders sometimes viewed as unsanitary or old-fashioned. Every morning after frying bacon, grandmothers carefully strained rendered fat through cheesecloth into a dedicated container, building up a supply of cooking gold. This grease became the foundation for cornbread, fried eggs, and seasoned vegetables, adding depth no store-bought oil could match. Food scientists now recognize that properly strained bacon grease, kept at room temperature, remains safe for weeks because rendering removes moisture where bacteria thrive. The fat also contains oleic acid, the same heart-healthy compound in olive oil. What critics called primitive was actually brilliant preservation. Resting meat at room temperature before frying was considered dangerous by modern standards, yet African American cooks practiced it for generations with remarkable results. Pulling chicken from the refrigerator 30 minutes before frying allowed protein to temper, ensuring even cooking throughout. Cold meat dropped into hot oil causes temperature shock, leading to uneven cooking where outside burns while inside stays underdone. Scientists acknowledge brief room temperature resting produces superior texture and doneness. The technique also prevented excessive oil splatter since warmer meat released less moisture violently upon contact with hot fat. Grandmothers understood rushing the process never yielded best results, and their patience created fried foods with perfect interiors. Adding vinegar to greens while cooking was standard practice in African American kitchens long before nutritionists understood why it worked so well. A splash of apple cider or white vinegar went into the pot alongside collards, turnip greens, or mustard greens as they simmered with smoked meat. The acid broke down tough fibers, making leaves tender faster while preserving vibrant color. More importantly, vinegar increased the bioavailability of iron and minerals locked inside the greens, allowing bodies to absorb more nutrition. Modern research confirms acidic environments help convert non-HME iron into forms the body can use. This simple hack turned affordable leafy vegetables into nutritional powerhouses that sustained families through hard times. Salting meat hours before frying was a practice modern cooks abandoned in favor of last-minute seasoning. Yet, African American kitchens maintained this tradition with delicious results. The technique involved generously salting chicken or fish and allowing it to rest for several hours or overnight before cooking. Salt draws moisture to the surface initially, but over time dissolves and is reabsorbed, carrying flavor deep into meat while restructuring proteins for better texture. Scientists call this dry brining, and research confirms it produces juicier, more flavorful results than immediate cooking. The method seasons meat throughout rather than just on surface, eliminating bland bites. Grandmothers knew good fried chicken required overnight preparation, and patience produced legendary results. Adding a splash of coffee to chocolate desserts was a secret weapon in African American baking that confused anyone who tasted the results but could not identify the mystery ingredient. Grandmothers stirred small amounts of strong black coffee into chocolate cake batters, brownie mixes, and puddings without the final product tasting like coffee at all. The caffeine and compounds in coffee amplified chocolate flavor, making it taste richer without adding more cocoa. This technique allowed families to stretch expensive chocolate further while achieving deeper results. Food scientists now understand that coffee contains compounds that enhance chocolate perception by activating the same taste receptors. Professional pastry chefs regularly use this trick today. Those kitchens held more healing than any pharmacy ever stocked. Like and subscribe so none of them disappear for good.